Here we are looking at events again. The classic model we've kind of already covered. If you remember, JavaScript is an event-driven language, so you can use event handlers when you load a page or do almost anything in response to a user action. We've got our spiffy event handler table 1.1 on page 14 of the textbook. Those are all the different, or some of the events that we can work with. You always want to try and separate your JavaScript code from the HTML page, just like you do with CSS. Separate your behavior from your page, just like you separate your presentation or how the page looks from your HTML code. You also want to think about embracing the limitations and the advantages of the browser. Use appropriate techniques for the unique user device that you're working with. Now, what all this means is basically we're going to take an event, like an awesome sort of event, like onClick, attach it as a property to an object, and then assign it a function or a handler. So, for example, login form.onSubmit. When somebody hits the submit button, we might go validate that form. And window.onLoad, you've seen, we're assigning it the init function. Now, there's some weirdness we've talked about that you only use the name of the function when you assign functions to events. And up until now, we've talked about that being because of the parenthesis means to run a function. We don't want to run it, we just want to assign it to an event. We're going to look at that a little bit deeper and some of the meanings involved. But in the meantime, just remember when you use and assign events to objects, use the correct form. And think of it just like an assignment statement, where you might have a variable mynum equals 2. Don't use parentheses on your functions, and don't put them in quotes. And we always want to make sure our page is loaded before you refer to all the objects on the page. So make sure that you use window.onLoad equal init. We'll talk about some other better ways of doing it over the next couple of weeks. All that is review, but let's look at the more modern way of handling events. And modern browsers have a newer way of handling events that provide code that's a bit more readable, it's a little bit more reusable, and it's certainly easier to debug. There's this DOM level 2 specification that came out around the year 2000, and it defines how to add and remove events to objects. The caveat, of course, is Internet Explorer. Before version 9, it didn't support the standard DOM level 2 specification. Go figure. It's IE, just go figure. Luckily, version 9 and certainly version 10 support DOM level 2 specs. And events can be chained together and independently added and removed, which is so cool. If you look at the way we were doing it last time, you only could have one event assigned, or one function assigned per event. You couldn't string them together, you couldn't chain them together, you couldn't have more than one. And with this more modern way, you can have more than one, and they just happen one after the other. Like, that makes sense. So, if you have an event, events happen in a certain sequence. And if you have some code here, you have a body tag that includes a div, that includes an unordered list, and a few list items. What happens is that events, say you want to click on the item number 2. In an old click event, you just put that right there on the element, and that's all you really could do. In the new event model, you could put it just about anywhere. Certain types of events pass down through and bubble back up that element hierarchy, and they're either handled on the way down or the way up, or actually on the event that the the object the event occurs on. So if you look at this graphically, because that kind of it's hard to visualize, if you have somebody clicking on that list item, what happens first is the different elements try and capture the event, and if they don't have an event handler, it just passes on down. And eventually it gets to the list item where the user clicked, and at that point the phase it's in is called at target. That first phase, number one, is called capturing, and the second one, when the event is propagating through, is called at target. And the last phase of an event is called bubbling, and it happens at the end, so you can respond to an event either when it's being captured, when it's at the target, or when it's bubbling back up through. And you can add your event handler just about anywhere. Now, if you look at an event handler, window.onload equal init, or you might, if you put it in line, say body onload equal init, you can only use one event handler. It's very limited in what it does and when it does it. A new way would be window.addEventListener load, which is the event, on window load, which is the function you're calling that's going to handle the event, and false, which is basically, are you going to capture the event in that first phase, the capturing phase. Now, of course, IE less than 9 is got something different going on, and we're not going to worry about it a lot because we're going to deal with it with jQuery starting next week. But for right now, that's one way of dealing with it if you have to use just straight JavaScript without the addition of jQuery. So if you look at an add event listener, 3 parameters in the parentheses, object.addEventListener, you've got an event name. All these are required. Event name and whatever you're listening to. A click, a key press, whatever you're listening for, that's where you would list it. And there are plenty of places to find lists of events online and in textbooks. The function that you're calling in response to the event, so you've got an event name, say click, function, you might respond to it with whatever function you'd like. And if you're going to use the capture phase, it's either true or false. Normally you're going to put false on there because normally you're going to do it at target. So in fact, jQuery doesn't even reflect the use capture parameter. So event name and function, what event? What are you going to do? So let's look at an example. Sorry, the type is a little small. We're getting into a little bit more complicated, a little bit more verbose code. But if we had a function that's adding an event handler, we had a variable red button and equals document.getElementById red button. So we have a button that's got an ID of red button. And what we're doing is we're saying, this is another way of handling IE before version 9. If redButton.addEventListener, the condition we're looking at in that if statement is basically saying, does addEventListener work? And if it doesn't, we're going to do something, and if it does, we're going to do something else. So if it does work, if addEventListener does exist, if it works, we're going to add an event listener to red button. That's that first in the if, the first bit of code. Else, if addEventListener doesn't exist, we know we're probably working with IE, so we're going to use the IE version of addEventListener, which is attach event. Again, this can double the size of your code doing this, which is why we're going to look at jQuery next week. But for this week, we're just going to look, for the most part, at standards compliant code. Now, when you remove an event listener, say you're done listening for a click or listening for a key press, you want to remove the event listener, then or you could remove one and put another one in its place. You basically go through the same process. Object.remove event listener, and remember, JavaScript is case sensitive. The event name, the function that was handling it, and if it was using use capture. Let's look at an example here. Same red button. Notice our red button variable is local because we defined it within the function. So you may have to think about that one. We defined a variable within the function, so it's only a local variable, only has local scope. And if the remove event listener exists, we're going to remove the event, and else it's IE, and that's all there is to it. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a little bit verbose. Now, another way of handling IE before version 9, and if you recall, version 9 of Internet Explorer only works on Windows 7 and above. So it doesn't work on Windows XP, and there's an awful lot of people out there with Windows XP. So you generally have to deal with this some way. There's an event called type of and window.event in parentheses that only works in IE. And you can test for that event with an if statement. And if it's undefined, you're going to do something for IE, else you're going to do something for all the standards compliant browsers. Because if type of window event doesn't exist or it's undefined, you're going to work with the standards compliant browser. Otherwise, it's IE.